Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. In today's video, we will talk about how to call the different functions that are available in MySQL database by using the Spring Data JPA. Okay, so these are the two different tables I have in my MySQL database that is having the employee and the customer tables. Okay, these are the different columns and the data that is present in those tables. So around these two tables, I created couple of functions like this one, the get customer account. Let's see what happens with this function. See, this is just a dummy function. It does nothing. Okay, just gives the count of all customers that are there in that customers table. Okay, this can be achieved by a simple SQL as well. We can call this SQL by using the Spring Data JPA framework, and we can get the count of customers as well. But as we wanted to show how to call a particular function, so I have written that particular SQL into a function, and we are going to call this function. Okay, so this is one function. It just gives the count of customers. Okay, there is another function. Okay, this function gives the customer email. Okay, this here in this function, the function's return type is int because it is going to return the count. In this function, the function's return type is varchar. So we will see how to get the integer and varchar types into our Java class. Okay, the other function which we have is get employee salary. This here we are passing two kinds of inputs. Okay, integer type and varchar type, and it returns what is the salary of that employee as a return type int. So in these two examples, we have only one input parameter or nothing. But here in this example, we will be having two input parameters and one output parameter. Okay, that is one thing. Here, this function. Okay, let me show you this. Yeah, this function is actually taking one input parameter, the employee ID, and returns boolean. Okay, what it does is it just checks the employee performance column. If it is excellent and good, then it returns employee is eligible for bonus, otherwise it returns false. Okay, so these are a couple of functions which we are going to call from SQL, I mean the Spring Data JPA framework. Okay, so in general, what we do, I mean, if we at all we have to call a particular function in the MySQL workbench or in any SQL editor, we generally use the SQL uh, related select query, right? Select query and that function name and what all parameters we need. Okay, we need to pass to that function those parameters we have to pass it. So by default, I mean, when we invoke a select query, it gives the data, right? Whether the employee is eligible or not. Similarly, we can execute get customer count as well. So this get customer count is not taking any arguments, right? So we don't have to pass any input data to this function. What happens with this? See this, how many customers are there in the customer table? Those, that is the count it is returning. So while we invoke a function from our Spring Data JPA, we are going to execute this as a query. Okay, this is how we call a function in any MySQL, right? So the same we have to call while we execute a function from the JPA repository. Okay, so let's start by executing the functions by creating a project in STS. Okay, let me create a project, Spring Starter project. Okay, and I'm going to name this project as MySQL function. Okay, com.appdev. This is the MySQL functions example. MySQL functions example. com.appdev.app is my project package. Okay, now I'm going to what all dependencies we need. We need the web dependency for sure, and we need the data JPA dependency because we are going to use the JPA repositories to invoke those functions, MySQL functions. And we also have to connect to MySQL database, so we need the MySQL driver. That's all. We don't need any other dependencies. Okay, so let me create a project by adding all those dependencies. Okay, project is getting ready. So once project is ready, what we have to do first, we have to connect to the database, and the connection properties we can specify it in the application.properties as we know it, right? So these are the different properties which I'm going to connect to the database. I have created a MySQL database in the Aurora AWS Aurora database. So I'm going to connect to that database. Okay. So after that, what we have to do, uh, we have to we have to create a repository, right? So that repository class we are going to create it. First, what we will do is we will try to call this one, the get customer count function. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create an interface. Okay, that will be customer repository. Okay, customer repository, and I'm going to put that in repository package. Okay, that's all. Okay, let me create that now. As we are going to create a repository, right, it should be extended from the CRUD repository or any JPA repository, right? So CRUD repository, and it should accept the type of the entity that will be returned by this by this repository, and the primary key type. Okay, so these are the different CRUD operations on this entity we are going to perform by using this customer repository, right? So what we have to do, we have to create an entity, the customer entity, right? So let's create a customer entity now. And I'm going to create this entity in com.appdev.app.entity. Okay, that is the package I'm going to create. So the customer entity will be like this. It will be exactly a replica of the uh, what is that, the customer table, right? So entity comes from the, okay, why is that the entity is not being identified? Yeah, see this, we are getting it from the data JPA dependency. Next, what we are going to do, we are going to relate all the attributes in this entity with the customer table, right? So at the date ID, at the date generated value, generation strategy we have to mention, type dot identity. Okay, next, and this will be referring to uh, column ID, right? Column ID is the column in the customer table. Similarly, I'm going to create first name. Okay, first name, and this will be referring to column name is equal to first underscore name. This is the column in the customer table. Now I'll create last name as well. Okay, at column name equal to last name. Okay, there are a couple of other columns as well in the customer table, like the customer is active or not, and its column is active. The other column private string email ID at column name equal to email underscore ID is the column name in the database. Now there is another column, the final one, private integer phone number at column name equal to phone underscore number. Okay, so these are the different properties that are going to refer to customer table. So let me add the getter and setter string to all of them. Okay, now the customer entity is ready. Okay, let us import the customer entity here. After that, what we have to do, we have to call the function, right? In the get customer account, get customer count function we have to call. Okay, so for example, I am going to write a function like this in my interface. Okay, and get that is fetch customer count is my function. Okay, so what is its return type? Its return type, whatever the function returns, right? The function returns the int return type. If you look at here, so my Java function will also return the int. Okay, here we have to mention this whenever this function is getting implemented by these repositories internally, right? It has to call a function. That function we have to specify using at query annotation. Okay, so at query annotation there is an attribute value. Okay, here we have to mention what we have used to call a function in the MySQL workbench, similar thing. Okay, nothing else. Select get customer count. Okay, that's all. This is not having anything, right? As we are using some native queries like select and all to call a function, so we have to specify native query equal to true. That's all. So internally, this is a function call, right? This is a function call with this is not having any inputs, but it returns int type output. Okay, so let me import query as well. So that's all. When this repository is being executed, implemented, the customer repository, uh, the particular query annotation, whatever we specify the call, that will be called internally when this function is being executed, fetch customer call. Okay, so other than this one, everything else we know how to call this repository from the service and how to call the service from the controller and how to invoke the controller from postman, right? So let's do that also quickly. Okay, so now I'm going to create a customer service, and this will be in com appdev.app dot service. Okay, here I'm going to annotate this class with that service. Here what we need, we have to call the customer repository, right? So I'm going to create a function here, the method here, and its return type is, we'll check that it's return a count of the customers, and its return type is the return type of the customer repository get customer fetch customer count. Okay, fetch customer count is the function in the repository, right? Same thing we are going to call it from here. Okay, other than that we have to auto-write this customer repository, and also service we should not specify the semicolon, and we have to mention the return. Okay, that's all. Now let's create a controller as well now. Okay, customer controller, I'm going to mention customer controller, and it will be in form.app.controller. Okay, and this will be at rest controller first, and then uh, at request mapping also. While we specify at request mapping, let us specify what is the URL, the request mapping URL for our uh, customer controller. Let's specify that as customer slash customer. Okay, slash customer. So here I'm going to have a method public uh, integer. Okay, public integer get customer count. This is a method. It is not having any parameters, right? But it will be having a request mapping slash count. Here what we need, we have to call that customer service dot wire. Here customer service dot get customer count return. Okay, that's all. Okay, let's run this program. Uh, Run this project as a Spring Boot application. Once the project is ready, what we have to do, we have to invoke slash customer slash count, right? Okay, now slash customer slash count. Okay, project is ready. Okay, it is still running. It is making a connection to the database. Okay, MySQL functions application is running on port 8081, right? So let's run that endpoint. Okay, what it is telling, there is a problem with the URL. See, what is the count that we have in this customer table? The number of rows. Same thing we are also getting from here. So while we execute a function from the MySQL workbench, right? Same thing we are getting when we call that particular function from this repository. Okay, that's all about this function. Okay, let's go to other functions as well quickly. That will be taken up very quickly. Okay, so the next function what we have the function uh, this one, right? Get customer email. Okay, so let's call that function now. So get customer email, if you look at that, it accepts an argument of type integer. So if we pass the employee ID, it gives you the email as a varchar type. Okay, let's check that. Uh, get customer email is the function, right? Okay, so for this, what we have to mention, we have to give the ID, employee ID, whatever we get in the request, right? On what it returns the employee email, the customer email. Sorry. So for this one, what we have to give, again same thing. Okay. Again, it will be a select query, get customer email, and we have to mention a placeholder here. So whatever we pass as an argument to this function, which is annotated with that query, the same value will be passed into that placeholder, whatever it takes an argument, that particular function, right? Again, this is a SQL type of calling a function, right? So we are mentioning native query true. Okay, that's all. Nothing else is required. We'll see if at all anything is required. We'll modify it. Okay. Now again, public. This is going to return a string get customer email. Now it has to accept a parameter from input, right? Okay, return customer repository dot get customer email of ID, right? Okay, next let's go to controller and add another endpoint. What is the return endpoint? We'll see it. This is going to give the email, right? And its return type is string and its method is get customer email. So what is the method? Get customer email in the service. There is a problem. Okay, get customer email. Okay, we have to pass whatever we get it from the path parameter, right? So let's mention this ID where we should be getting some input parameter as the customer ID, right? So the same thing we will be passing. Now let's restart and see whether we are able to get the email by calling this particular function. Okay, so what is that? For the two we have this email, right? For three customer ID we have this email. Let's test it out whether it works fine properly or not. Okay, so customer slash email slash one. There is a problem. We'll see it. What is the select get customer email? See our method, whatever we have given, right? That is getting executed. That is fine. Customer service is calling customer repository. Whether customer controller returning anything? Yes, it is returning something. Do we have any customer with the ID 1? Yes, we have it. Let's try with other customers. Okay, let me modify this method as fetch customer email. Let me restart this. Now let's check that. No, nothing is given as an output, right? Are we calling get customer email? Yeah, okay. Customer repository is here. We're returning something. Okay, let's put some SOP here, whether we are getting the email or not into the service at least. Now let's run this application again. Okay, it's running. Now let me execute. It's coming as null. Why it is coming as null from repository? Why the repository is not able to call the function? Hmm. Are we able to get the input ID into the controller? Let's check that. Yeah, that is the problem. We are not even able to get the ID into the controller. Okay, what is the problem with this controller? We will see that. Yeah, the main problem here is we have not mentioned anything about the path param because we have to get it from the path param, right? The path variable, there should be some annotation, right? So let's check that now. It's running fine now. See, it is giving the email ID. Okay. Now let's go back for the other email. Yeah, if we check one, it gives the same. So that is about calling a function which is having an input argument and return type is string. Okay. Now let's go back and check the other two functions. Okay. See these two functions, right? These are on the different table. Okay. Employee table, and these are calling the employee salary and the employee is eligible for bonus or not. These are the two functions. Okay, what we'll do is for the simplicity of the video duration, I just want to make it short, so that's why we will see these two functions in a different video, how to call these functions, which returns, which accepts more than one parameter and returns something, which accepts a parameter and do some logic and returns a boolean. How to call these functions from Spring Data JPA in a different video. That's all for today. In today's video, we talked about how to call the different functions using the native SQL approach and how to write use the query annotation using the in the repositories in the data repositories. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Please give it a like, share.